Hi again. A couple more quick comments on sort of the nuts and bolts of the discussion forums and especially the essay project. One thing that I'm surprised to be encountering at this point in the course, but I'm still seeing a lot of it, excuse me, is a substantial number of folks seem a little bit confused about what it means to offer reasons for the views that you hold. And this is a really, 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 really important idea. Being able to articulate some sort of rationale, some sort of explanation for why something is morally wrong. Now, there might be some things that are what philosophers would call the basic or the fundamental or the brute facts about morality. Or that there might be some things that just are wrong without any further explanation being possible. One example here that, I mean, if anything's uncontroversial, it might be this, that inflicting pain with no good reason is just wrong. Right? That might be the bedrock. That might be the most fundamental moral claim that we can think of. And if somebody asks us, but why is it wrong to do that? Maybe there's no good answer. There's big, huge philosophical puzzles that lurk in these waters, but they're not the puzzles we have to wrestle with in applied ethics. If you're interested, you can take my God and Morality course this fall, and we'll get into some of those kinds of things. But there's been some real problems in the discussion forums. Well, this is probably a good way to get into this issue. And pardon me if you hear strange noises in the background as my children are shrieking in the room next door. There is a difference. I'm going to give you another one of these distinctions where I need you to listen carefully and maybe even write down these terms because it's so important. There is a difference between stating an author's conclusion and engaging with the author's ideas. Right? So one thing that's really common in the discussion forums is I will post a question like, tell me what you think about the death penalty. And then what people will say is, well, I think this, and Ernest Vandenhag would agree with me, and Jeffrey Riemann would disagree with me because he thinks the death penalty is bad. Well, that's true, but if that's all you say, all you're doing is telling me what the author's conclusion is. You're not engaging with the ideas at all. You're not explaining why Jeffrey Riemann thinks the death penalty is bad and wrong, right? What I'd like to hear from you, what I'd like to see more of in the discussion forums, and some people have done a very nice job of this. Other people have kind of ignored this entirely. What I'd like to hear is you engage with Riemann's reasons. So, right, he doesn't just say, the death penalty is bad. Boo, death penalty. I hate it. Makes me feel icky inside when I think about it. No, he says, look, human dignity is really important to respect. And I'm obviously summarizing here. He says, imposing the death penalty, he thinks, is a deep and serious violation of human dignity. It's something we ought not do. And then he explains that, doesn't he? I mean, he says in the textbook, here's what I mean by human dignity. Here's why the death penalty is a violation of human dignity. Well, if you're going to reject Riemann's position, what I'd like to hear from you is I'd like to hear you say, Riemann thinks the death penalty is a violation of human dignity, but I disagree. Maybe that's because you don't think there's such a thing as human dignity. You know, maybe that's where you disagree with Riemann. Or maybe you agree with him that there is such a thing as human dignity, but you don't think that the death penalty violates it. I mean, Immanuel Kant, who's also discussed in the chapter on the death penalty, he's somebody who thinks that the death penalty actually is a form of respect for human dignity. So they disagree on this deeper kind of level. The distinction shouldn't be too difficult a one to grasp, and we see this sort of thing all the time. So, for example, if you're a sports fan, I've mentioned before that I'm a native Clevelander, and I'm a big fan of Cleveland sports. So I might be arguing, or I might be discussing with some fellow Cleveland sports fans about whether the Indians will make the playoffs this year. And we might say, here's how the conversation might go. I might say, I think the Tribe's gonna win the AL Central. I think we're gonna make it to the postseason this year. And I think that because the bullpen has been exceptional, And I think the starting pitching is for real as well. I think that they're going to keep up this pitching, right? And because they're throwing the ball so well, I think they're going to make it to the postseason. And then I might talk to my friend, and he might say, well, yeah, I do think the Tribe's going to win the AL Central. But I think the reason they're going to win is there's no way that Grady Sizemore is going to struggle this much the rest of the season. I don't buy that the Indians' pitching is that good. But I do think that their offense is better than it's looked so far this year. I think they're going to hit a lot more home runs. I think they're going to score a lot more in the second half of the season after the All-Star break. And that's why I'm pretty confident they're going to make the playoffs this year. Right? So you see, there would be an example, a really mundane one, but I think a clear example, where two people agree in their conclusion. Cleveland's going to make the postseason, and let's hope that's right. But they disagree with each other about the reasons for holding that conclusion. And in this class, the conclusions are important, right? The moral claims are really important, but at least as important are the reasons, the arguments, all those moral theories, all those details that these authors go into of explaining, here's why you should agree with me. And remember, in your essay project, and to a lesser extent in the discussion forums, what you're trying to do is persuade the reader that your position on an issue is the most reasonable one. What you're trying to do is persuade the reader that he or she ought to come to see things your way, not merely because it makes you feel good, or because you were always taught this by your parents, or because your religion says this is how things are, but rather because there are good reasons for embracing that claim. That's the trick, and that's something that's really, really crucial to focus on. In a related vein, this is something that came up in comes up in most of the discussion forums. I think it came up to some degree in stage 3 of the essay project. Is make sure that when you assert a position, when you assert some kind of viewpoint, that you do give some sort of rationale for it. So I was a little bit surprised, for example, in the abortion discussion forum, to see a lot of people saying stuff like, well, I think that abortion should be permitted until this point in pregnancy, right? And then they would fill in at the end of the first trimester, or until there's a heartbeat, or until whatever. Abortion should be permitted until this point. Well, why, right? What's so special about that point? If you're going to state a claim like abortion should be permissible up until the end of the first trimester, you need to explain to the reader why that's a wise and good position to hold. What's so significant about the end of the first trimester? What's morally significant? Why should I think that a woman who chooses to have an abortion in the first trimester is doing something that's morally acceptable, whereas a woman who chooses to have an abortion in the third trimester is doing something morally wrong? What is the difference? Don't just assert that you see a difference. Explain to the reader what the difference is and why you think it's important. Similar stuff came up in stage 3 of the essay project, the brainstorming portion of it, where people would say stuff like, so if you look at that assignment, if you have your guidelines for essays handout, mine was right here. If you look at page 3 here, I asked you to think about, what are the main issues surrounding my topic? What are the possible views about this topic? What are the best reasons for embracing each of those views? People would say, well, the best reason for holding this view is that you feel that way, or that's what your beliefs are. Be clear that or let me ask you to understand that that's not a reason. If I say, well, why are you opposed to the death penalty? And you say, because I am opposed to the death penalty. That's not a reason, right? That's just a statement of your opposition. A much better answer would be something like, well, I'm opposed to the death penalty because I think that it tends to be abused. I think that if we have the death penalty, then there's going to be many people who are innocent but are put to death by mistake, and so on. So be aware of that sort of thing. One last quick point before I run out of time here is in the essay project, you need to have a clear thesis statement. Make sure you have a crystal clear thesis statement, and make sure it's a moral claim. Make sure it's a statement about what is good or bad or right or wrong, or about what we ought to do or what we ought to make legal or illegal, and not merely a descriptive statement of fact about how things are. If you have questions, please ask them in the discussion forum.